What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Where Stats Meet Instinct. I'm your host, Sam, former college baseball coach, college baseball player, now talking A's baseball here. And this was as big of a week as I can remember from the A's standpoint. You have the A's letting go of longtime general manager David Forst. And for me, I think this is a seismic move for the A's. Really, my whole lifetime, I'm 32 years old. They have had more or less the same front office running the baseball operations for the A's, right? Forst is a little bit, I view him as kind of an extension of Billy Beane. He was one of Billy Beane's longtime assistants. It seemed like when he took over, it was really just keeping the same front office intact that had been there for a long time, even before that. I view David Forst getting let go by the A's as maybe like as big of a move as a team could possibly make. Like the general manager or whoever's in charge of the front office, and I think there's a distinction there that we'll get into in a little bit. But David Forst was in charge of the A's front office as the GM. And that position, I think, is the most important position in a major league organization by a significant amount. I think it's easily 10 times more important than the major league manager. And I think a lot of people have that flipped. But the front office, they decide what players to acquire. They decide how to develop players in the minor leagues. They nowadays have a really big hand in what is going on the field game to game. Like a lot of these managerial decisions, the front office has a significant impact on how they want the team run on the field. So David Forst getting let go is a huge, huge shakeup for the A's front office. And what I really wanted to do today was kind of get into the Forst tenure and give him some grades based on various categories so we can really get a holistic picture of what this tenure was like for the A's under David Forst. Because I think I see two different opinions quite a bit. One is that, hey, the A's front office, A's fans have always prided themselves on having a front office that is really good. David Forst was a part of that, so David Forst was really good. And then I see a lot of people saying, like, David Forst, the A's were terrible this year. He was the architect of that, so he's terrible. And I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. And so I kind of wanted to go through the various things I think the GM, big picture wise, really is responsible for, and kind of talk about like what David Forst did in each of those categories. I also want to talk at the end of kind of what I'm looking for from the A's next GM, what I want the direction of the organization to kind of be moving forward. There might be some things that I say there that surprise some people, but we're going to get into that. And we're going to talk about what I think the direction of the A's should be moving forward. So for one, I'm a little bit surprised they let go of David Forst. One, it's mid-season. And two, it just felt like the kind of arrangement where he was going to take them through the Sacramento years and then they were going to go to the next guy. I also didn't really believe the A's had this sense of urgency to win right now that this move shows. Because it does seem like the A's have kind of been spinning their wheels in Sacramento and almost using these years as like, hey, let's kind of refine our process. Let's figure out what's going to work in Vegas and kind of go from there and not really worry so much about winning in Sacramento. This move, I think it shows a little bit of a sense of urgency there. So for one, that surprised me a little bit. I don't think it's the wrong move. I tweeted this the other day when it happened, like, it's really tough to argue with any changes the A's make because of how poorly this year has gone. Like this year has gone in basically the worst case scenario for the A's. So it's tough to argue against any changes they make because obviously changes need to be made because a year like this really just can't happen. Let's talk about the four categories I want to grade David Forst on. Now, in my real life, in my non-podcast life, I'm a history teacher, so grading is kind of what I do. I think some of these grades are pretty tough grades, but we'll get into why that is in a little bit. So to start with, I view the role that David Forst was in being general manager. Now, the A's, I don't believe, have a president of baseball operations that kind of heads the front office. So David Forst, for all intents and purposes, was the guy running the front office every capacity. So I've heard some people talk about, especially the ones that are really just don't want to give Forst credit for anything, talk about the draft, and they're like, oh, he doesn't get credit for the draft because that's the scouts. I find it really difficult to parse like what he's responsible for and what he's not in that regard, because if you're going to take that logic of like, hey, the scouts are in charge of the draft, well, then you can't really give David Forst the blame for some of these bad trades that have been made, because the pro scouting department is the ones recommending the prospects for David Forst to trade for. David Forst isn't out there sitting in the Atlanta Braves high A team scouting, and he's not just sitting there like, oh yeah, you know what, I'm scouting this game in person, and Royber Salinas is really the guy we need to trade for. No, that's the scouts that are paid to scout other organizations that are recommending those. So I feel like if we start parsing like, hey, he's in charge of the scouts here, he's not in charge of the scouts here, the scouts get credit for this, he doesn't get credit for this, or he gets credit for this, he doesn't get credit for this, I think we get into just some really murky water, and it's impossible for us on the outside to tell. But what I do know is he is in charge of overseeing the draft, trades, free agents, and international signings. Now, he's using scouts to get information as to what to do for all of those things, but I'm going to give David Forst all the credit and all the blame for these various areas, because I think that's the easiest way to evaluate the A's front office under David Forst and give us the most accurate picture. Yes, there's other people under him involved, right? Scouts are involved in the draft. The pro scouting department is in charge of free agents and trades and internet and stuff like that as well. But David Forst oversees that, so I'm going to hold him responsible for each of these categories, right? And one thing too, I don't think a lot of people realize, the scouting department for a Major League Baseball team is twofold. You have your amateur scouting department. They're the ones out there scouting players for the draft. And then you have your pro scouting department. They're the ones scouting every other team's minor league affiliates and major league teams in order to basically have their own evaluations of these other prospects, so that when it comes time to trade, the organization has an accurate picture of who's valuable and who's not in these various organizations, right? So scouts are not just on the amateur side, they're on the pro side as well. But that's just kind of a side note here. Again, I'm going to hold David Forst responsible for each of these areas. So again, I broke it up into 4 categories here. We have the draft, trades, free agents, international signings. And so we're going to start with the highest grade and work to the lowest grade. And trust me, we'll focus a lot on the lower grades as well. The draft, I give David Forst an A-. I'm going to weigh the more recent drafts more heavily, more recent acquisitions in any of these areas a little bit more heavily, just because as a front office, you need to constantly be evolving. So where they have evolved to is kind of what I want to grade them on right now. In the draft, I give an A-. I think they've obviously done a great job with their first round picks. People kind of take for granted some of the success the A's have had in the draft. But you talk about Soderstrom, you talk about Mason Miller, you talk about Kurtz, you talk about Wilson, you talk about how these last few drafts where the guys haven't quite made it to the big leagues yet, but look promising. You talk about guys like Gage Jump. If you evaluate just the last 5 years based on talent MLB teams have gotten from their draft classes, the A's are in the top. I don't think there's a way to rank them outside of the top 4 or 3. And really, they have a legitimate argument for number 1. There were some bad drafts early, and the A's have kind of shifted their strategy in recent years, and I give them credit for that. The A's were going really high-risk, high-reward draft picks for an extended period there. The thought around baseball was kind of that, hey, the A's aren't going to sign any big-time superstars, so they're trying to be really aggressive in the draft with like high-risk, high-reward players, right? And a lot of those high risks, they ended up not panning out at all. Like Austin Beck, I think, is the biggest example. 6th overall pick, never played above AA for the A's. People like to talk about Kyler Murray. I think people misremember Kyler Murray a little bit. Like he was a 5'9" quarterback. No one expected him to go 1st overall, win a Heisman. He was projected like a 5th round pick going into that year. And he said he was 100% committed to baseball. I actually don't blame the A's for taking that risk. I don't think that's even a bad draft pick. It's just we don't know what happened. Like, we don't know the draft pick. And either way, you talk about where he was drafted. He was drafted between Cole Stewart and Travis Swaggerty. So it's not like the picks before and after were absolutely killing it there. That wasn't a very strong draft. I don't really hold the A's taking a big risk against them. The odds of a guy like that going on to win the Heisman and be the first 5'9" quarterback drafted 1 overall in my lifetime, pretty slim. So that's not one I hold against them, but they did have some rough drafts early. The reason I put a minus instead of just a straight A is just the pitching talent they've drafted. Recent years, it's gotten better. You've taken Gage Jump, you've taken Jamie Arnold in the first round. This year, they stocked up on pitching early in the draft as well after the Drew Burress pick. Some of those pitching draft picks look really good or look better, and some of that's development. But for me to give a straight A, I would have liked to see the A's draft at least one very high-end starting pitcher. I'm really thinking that's going to be Gage Jump, but prior to Gage Jump, and they really didn't do that. That's where the minus comes in. I think they've drafted really well. I think they've gone with safe college hitters, and they've been rewarded handsomely for that. I'm going to give that an A- for David Forst, right? Again, he's overseeing the draft. That's what I'm going to give him there. Next one, trades. I gave trades a C. Now, a few years ago, I probably would have given this a D or an F. But I think some of the trades that the A's got hammered for look a lot better now. Shea Langoliers for Matt Olson. We also have to factor in the degree of difficulty. With David Forst, he was never going to have the resources to extend players up until recently. And he was never going to have the money to spend. And it was always going to be tough to attract free agents. Even in Oakland, it was really tough to attract free agents. Now in Sacramento, it's really tough to attract free agents. So there is the degree of difficulty you have to factor in. I think David Forst, while he was the general manager, had the highest degree of difficulty of any general manager in all of baseball, right? So we got to factor that in. They weren't going to re-sign Matt Olson, at least for what Matt Olson signed with the Braves, right? If you're the A's, cost-controlled players are the most important thing, and getting an all-star catcher in that deal for Matt Olson, who then got paid, I believe it was like $140 million afterwards. Pre-arbitration, Shea Langoliers for Matt Olson you have to pay. The A's at the very least broke even on that trade. I would say the A's, based on JT Ginn's success, have broken even on the Chris Bassett trade. And recently, I think they've done well. I loved the Mason Miller trade. Getting Leo DeVries, I think, was an absolute steal. I actually think some of the minor moves that people don't really think about this year to improve the roster on the margins that don't seem like a big deal, but are pretty savvy moves, were pretty solid by David Forst. Acquiring Jonah Heim for cash considerations. Acquiring Alika Williams, who was a guy who hadn't even played in the big leagues in the last year or two. But now has contributed positively to the A's. Jose Suarez, guys like that, where it's like, hey, they're not stars, but they're better than what the A's had filling that spot on the roster. Basically, being able to trade for these guys without really having to give up that much and improving the big league roster on the margins with Jonah Heim, with Alika Williams. Suarez has been, a long reliever for him. All of those trades are positive. Now, that's all the good stuff. It's also been a lot of bad. Matt Chapman trade didn't work at all. The Frankie Montas trade, we won that trade too. He didn't do anything for the Yankees, and they got Sears, Medina, Waldichuk. Overall, those three have been a lot more productive than Montas has been since that time, even though that hasn't been like a super successful return. They won that trade too. The Matt Chapman trade was horrible, and overall, you look at that big rebuild the A's did in the early 2020s, and they just didn't get enough for that, right? You really got Medina, Ginn, Langoliers, and that's not nothing. And for a while, it looked like the return on that was next to nothing. But it's not good either. And so losing Matt Chapman for absolutely nothing, several other trades that went really poorly that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. I don't think you can give it higher than a C. I do think even the recent trades like Jacob Lopez and Springs for Joe Boyle, it's probably a wash, but you'd probably say the A's have gotten the better end of that, especially given the production they got from Springs and Lopez last year for not really giving that much up. Like the other guys in that trade haven't done anything. Joe Boyle hasn't established himself as a big leaguer. But at best, what you're talking about is breaking even on most of these trades, right? Some little trades on the margins the A's won, but most of these trades at best are breaking even. And in totality, you're breaking even to maybe a little less than breaking even. So I'll give that a C minus. If a C is just like, hey, you're breaking even on all these trades, they didn't quite do that. So I'm going to give them a C minus. If you want to give them a D plus, you can do that. But trades really, it's better than people think, but it's still not good under David Forst, right? So then we get into free agents, and I give David Forst a D on this. I don't think the A's have done well in free agency. And granted, we do have to factor in the degree of difficulty here, right? They don't have money to spend. They're trying to sign free agents in Sacramento. They have generally struggled to bring in free agents that are productive. Now, if you're the A's, you have to kind of, in free agency, pick from the scrap heap a little bit. But what you still want to do is find guys that help your roster. If you look at this free agency class, you have two guys that aren't there anymore, and Savale, who's been DFA'd, and Scott Barlow, who was DFA'd. You have Mark Leiter Jr., who's injured and out for the year. Mark Leiter Jr. for $2.8 million is fine. Like, that's fine. That's not a bad free agent sign for the cost. But the other two, like, they barely made it to the All-Star break or didn't make it to the All-Star break at all before getting DFA'd. Those are bad free agent signs. And it just feels like the A's have never, in recent years at least, signed anyone in free agency that's been more than just like, okay, he was average, right? They haven't improved their roster through free agency. Now, even with this next GM, free agency is kind of like a Band-Aid. You build your roster through the draft. You build your roster through signing international prospects. You build your roster through homegrown talent if you're the A's. And free agency is kind of like a Band-Aid. You patch holes with it, right? And some organizations have more money to spend, right? Like the Dodgers can patch more holes than the A's. They can throw more money at that problem. They can get a better Band-Aid. But you don't want to build your roster through free agency regardless. You want to use that to fill in the holes on your roster. But primarily, you're going to build your roster from within, from the draft, from international signings, from some savvy trades. And then free agency is kind of just the cherry on top. It's kind of just to patch a few holes here and there and really make things work. Yes, you want the A's to spend more in free agency. I think they will in Vegas. But that's not how you want to – that's not what you want to rely on to build your roster. But the A's just haven't really had any success in free agency, so I give them a D. And now we get to the thing that I think is completely underrated. Nobody talks about this with the A's front office, except for I've discussed it with a couple other people. But the thing the A's have done the worst during the David Forst era is sign international free agents. Now, to be fair, that's gotten better in the last 2 years. But you look at the totality of the David Forst regime, how many good Dominican prospects have we had in the organization? How many? There's almost none, right? The nation that produces the second most big leaguers in the world, superstars all over the game of baseball. The A's have had almost no prospects from there. And they've spent money too. They spent money on Robert Posson, who didn't work out as a shortstop and is now pitching, I think, in rookie ball for the A's. And they've spent money in other areas. But if you look at the A's top 30 prospect list, this year, so Edgar Montero snuck into the top 10 with some graduations and stuff right now. He is the first Dominican prospect in the top 10 since Robert Posson. And Robert Posson was a complete washout, didn't do anything ever in pro ball. So he was really only a top prospect when he signed. They also signed Johansi Colome, who is playing the DSL right now, and he's in their top 10. But again, before this year, you have him, and then before that, I think it was like Renato Nunez. The A's just have not done well with international signings at all. So I give them an F for this because you look at the top 100 prospects in Major League Baseball, you look at the top 10, half of them are from the Dominican, right? Or a third of them are from the Dominican. it is a really key area to sign guys and then develop them into quality baseball players or quality big leaguers or quality prospects to be able to use as assets. And the A's have basically gotten no value from that in the David Forst regime. Like, international signings have been terrible. Now, they've done better in recent years, right? You have Bryson Guedes, who is one of my favorite prospects in the whole organization. He's an 18-year-old in high A right now who's playing really well from Venezuela. You have Wei-In Lin, who was probably my favorite A's prospect this year before he got hurt with Tommy John surgery. You have guys like Shotaro Mori, and I do give the A's some credit for getting really creative with their international signings. They've also done that from Cuba too, like Luis Morales, the high-profile guy that they signed and looked like a good investment up through the minor leagues and stuff. He's had a really down year this year, really bad year this year. But still, you would say, like, hey, that's money well spent if you're going to get that guy into your system. But in general, man, like, you look at some of these top organizations, you look at the Brewers, you look at the Rays, you look at any organization. I think literally every other organization has done better than the A's in international free agency during the Forst tenure. And again, that's a whole swath of players that you can develop, and they can turn into either assets that you trade in the minor leagues, or they can turn into quality big leaguers. And that's just prospects, period. Pitchers, man, they haven't gotten any pitchers from the DR, which is pretty crazy to me. So I give Forst an F for that. So grades, just to recap here: draft A-, trades C, free agents D, international signings F. So you would probably even that out and give them a C- based on those grades and just averaging them out. And, I think that's kind of how you have to see David Forst. He was good at some things, or some of his departments did really, really well. Others really, really struggled. There were some things in the middle. And then he was working with a super high degree of difficulty. Again, the A's weren't attracting free agents even when they were in Oakland. They weren't a team that was going to spend a lot of money. His degree of difficulty was really high. Now, if your degree of difficulty is going to be that high, I think you have to be not decent, but excellent. I think Forst is a good baseball guy. I think if he was the GM of another team, he can probably go somewhere and do fairly well. He is a big part of the A's behind the scenes as assistant GM and stuff like that for a lot of their really good playoff caliber teams, even before he was the general manager. The guy knows what he's doing. But when you have a high degree of difficulty, you can't just be decent, or you just can't be like a good baseball guy that does a decent job. Like, for the A's to win consistently, they need a GM that is well above average, right? And the A's just didn't have that. And I think it became more and more obvious as things were unfolding this year and in previous years that, hey, they missed on too many trades. They weren't adding enough in free agency. They weren't able to kind of outsmart other teams in terms of signing these low budget free agents. And they basically weren't getting anything from their international classes. So you look and you're like, all right, they drafted well, they did. But when that's the one area you're doing things really well, it just wasn't enough, and the A's needed change, right? And I'm a David Forst fan. Like, I've defended that guy a lot. I think, like I said, I think he's a really good baseball guy. I think he had a really difficult job. I think he had a situation that other front offices around baseball are going to look at and say, hey, you couldn't have realistically expected that guy to win in a lot of those situations he was in. And from a hiring standpoint, if he wants to go to another front office, I don't know if he does, because it's kind of been talked about. He doesn't want to leave California. Other front offices would hire him as assistant GM. He'd be in the running for other GM jobs, I think, no problem, because I think the baseball world kind of knows his situation that he was in. But again, I think it's good for the A's to change a little bit. Like I said, this front office has basically been in place since the entire time I've been alive. I don't know another front office from the A's standpoint. When you think about Forst being an extension of each other. So really interesting situation there with David Forst getting let go. I think it was necessary. I think Forst did a fine job. I think there were just some areas where the A's didn't do enough under Forst. But again, this is a huge move, because we're talking about pitching development. We're talking about minor league development. we're talking about free agents, we're talking about trades, we're talking about how the A's literally play baseball on the field. The front office is the most important thing for that. Now, I don't know what the A's are going to do here. A lot of teams are hiring president of baseball operations as kind of like the person who actually oversees the front office, and then the GM is beneath that person. The A's haven't had that organizational structure, at least in recent years. Basically, the GM is the top of the front office. I don't know if the A's are going to kind of split some of those duties and have a president of baseball operations like Buster Posey is for the Giants, like Paul Tabani is for the Nationals, who got hired recently. Guys like that. It seems like that's the direction a lot of organizations are going. And the guys that really get a lot of credit or blame are the president of baseball operations rather than the GM. So we'll see what the A's decide to do there. But regardless, what do I want to see from this next A's front office, this next hire? So the A's could go internal. Feinstein's a good baseball guy as well. Like, you read the book Moneyball, he's mentioned in it several times as being a member of the A's organization. He's been an important part of this organization. I don't want to see them hire internally just because I feel like the A's have kind of started to fall behind other organizations in terms of how they evaluate players. And I think a fresh perspective is what the A's need moving into a new era of A's baseball. So an internal hire, hey, the A's have some good people. It's not like this front office is inept, or it's not like this front office is incompetent. Have they made some bad moves? Yes, but that's going to be the case with all front offices. You're not going to find one with a perfect track record. But I don't want them hiring internally. I just don't. I think that would basically mean, hey, it was more a Forst issue. The A's were fine with how the front office was operating, but they knew Forst wasn't staying. They kind of needed a scapegoat, so they got rid of him. But they're basically going to keep the same front office rolling along. That's not really what I want to see, and that's what I think an internal hire would say to me about what the A's are doing. They could go with a flashy name. They could go with a guy who's been a general manager several times and is a guy that baseball people, baseball fans know the name of. I think there's a decent chance they go in that direction just because I think the PR going into Vegas, there might be some incentive to get a guy that people have hired before and that people know and all of that. Or they could go kind of with a younger GM from one of these other organizations. That's kind of the direction I want the A's to go in, because that would signal to me the A's are doing a total overhaul of the front office, the organization, stuff like that, which would be exciting to see. The organizations that have undergone these overhauls in recent years have seen pretty immediately positive results. The Nationals are one this year that I can think of. The Marlins a few years ago. Teams like that. The overhauls, the White Sox, the teams that have really overhauled their front offices have seen immediate steps forward, and that's kind of what I want the A's to do. Now, I'm not going to throw out any names because it would be really easy to say for me, like, oh, like, hey, the Dodgers do things well, their assistant GM. Well, we don't really know behind closed doors who's calling the shots, right? There's some assistant GMs that do a lot more than other assistant GMs, right? There's assistant GMs that might not be part of an organization that the A's that you think of as like, hey, this is a great organization, but they might do a lot and they might know their stuff and they might be the right guy for the job, right? The A's could bring in it, like, you know, if it's like the Cardinals, or the Cardinals are actually a really good organization, but if they brought in an assistant GM from like the Cardinals, something like that, and that was the guy you had take over the A's front office, I would love that, right? And that might not be the flashiest organization to come from, but that's just an example, right? I'd love someone from the Dodgers. I'd love someone from the Brewers. I'd love someone from the Guardians. But at the same time, like, am I really going to know when that guy gets hired if it's a good hire or not? Like, I'm not. I'm not in the weeds enough to know how much various assistant GMs do and how great they are, good they are at their jobs. So I do want them to go with someone a little bit on the younger side. I want them to go with someone that's going to overhaul the front office and kind of modernize the pitching development, modernize the minor league development, modernize the process in which the A's evaluate acquiring players. Because one thing that I'm actually, and I've been really critical of this front office about this entire time since I started having the show, is just the pieces didn't really fit together on this team in this ballpark. It was a bad defensive team with a young pitching staff in an offensive environment, and the A's continue to get these soft-tossing fly ball pitchers that used to work in Oakland and used to work really well in Oakland. Like, Mike Fiers was a really solid pitcher for the A's in Oakland. AJ Griffin was a really solid pitcher for the A's in Oakland. If those guys were pitching in SAC, they would be doing the same thing all these pitchers are doing for the A's this year. So it just seemed like the front office was super, super slow in adapting to a new offensive environment. And that's something they for sure saw coming. They just didn't make the proper moves because you and I watching the A's knew, like, hey, you're going into a minor league ballpark. It's going to be a lot more offensive. It's going to Joey Estes and Mitch Spence are not going to work in this type of environment, right? But the A's front office just didn't seem like they had a sense of urgency with reshaping the roster in a way that's going to play in an offensive environment. And you look at the A's roster now; they hit a lot of ground balls. They don't get a lot of ground balls as a pitching staff. And it's just one of those things where you look at it and you're like, man, this is not constructed in a way that fits, right? I want the new general manager, president of baseball operations, whatever the title may be, to put together a roster that fits, to put together a roster that makes sense in the long term. There's some really positive things about the Oakland A's from an offense, or about the A's from an offense perspective. But when they were in Oakland, this type of team worked from a pitching standpoint. Now that they're in Sacramento, now that they're transitioning into Las Vegas, that is not going to work. And I want to see adjustments from this new front office. And it's going to take time, right? The adjustments about like pitching development, about international scouting, about things like that, those are going to be, 5 years down the road when you see the results, right? You might be able to get some idea of that from watching minor league teams, checking out minor league teams. But at the major league level, you're not going to see those results for a long time. But I do want a new perspective. I do want this to be a full shakeup. And one other thing too, I've talked about my thoughts on the manager of the A's, Mark Kotsay. I'm super neutral about him. I think he gets way too much blame because he's not responsible for nearly the things people think he's responsible for. And a lot of the moves people complain about, it's really just what it's like managing a bad pitching staff. I know that from experience. But if you're going to hire a new GM, new president of baseball operations, whatever it may be, I would really like if they got to pick their manager that is going to be able to implement the new vision of the front office. Now, I don't think the A's are going to do that because Kotsay has an extension. The A's aren't going to pay two managers next year. That's just never been the way that Fisher operates, that the A's operate, spending that kind of money on two different people. And they're going to have to pay Kotsay next year regardless. So I think they'll leave Kotsay there. It would make me really excited for the future of this organization if the new general manager, new president of baseball ops got to basically have input on the new manager. And, we'll see. We'll see. I would love if they did that this offseason. I don't think Kotsay is a bad manager. I think he's in a bad situation. But at the same time, if you're going to have a new front office that's implementing a new vision, a new organizational philosophy, doing all of that, I would like for them to be able to hire their own guy. I don't think that's what the A's will do this offseason, but I would love if that's how they kind of handle things. So, again, guys, I wanted to kind of break down Forst in a little bit more detail with a little bit more of a nuanced perspective, going category by category and really determining what he did well and what his front office did well and what his front office struggled with. Because I think it's all or nothing. A lot of people have that perspective of it. And it's really a complicated tenure because there were some things that the A's did really well during his time, and there were some things that they really struggled with during his time. But I'm excited for kind of a restart. I think this season really made it obvious that there needs to be a little bit of a reset within this organization. And I'm glad the A's showed a little bit of a sense of urgency. Now that all of that positive stuff, if they hire internally, I'm not going to have any of those positive feelings about this firing. I think it will be the biggest waste ever if Forst is fired for someone internally to take over. But at this moment, I'm going to give the A's the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to assume they hire externally. I'm excited about what the A's are going to look like moving forward. I'm excited to see if their draft philosophy changes or if it stays the same. I'm excited to see what players they target in free agency. I'm excited to see what the front office does in terms of implementing things to develop players at the minor league level. And again, a lot of that is ownership needing to spend on the stuff that on the tech to help players develop at the minor league level. But again, I would love to see what the front office does from that perspective. So we will wrap it up there, guys. This has been another episode of Where Stats Meet Instinct. Again, I'm your host, Sam. You can find me on Twitter at Straight A's. Like and subscribe to the channel, guys. Everyone on this network is doing a lot of great things. We are all super passionate A's fans. We love A's baseball. So check out all the other shows here, guys. We will wrap it up there. This has been another episode of Where Stats Meet Instinct. And as always, guys, go A's.